Hi, today I'm going to be talking about my Penguin Vintage Classics collection. It's not a big collection, so let's get started. Firstly, we have The White Guard by Mikhail Bulgakov. This is set in Kiev during the Ukrainian Civil War, just after the First World War, and it's about a family called the Turbins who live in Kiev while there is this civil war going on and different factions are fighting for control of the city. The author's own family lived in the city during this time, so while this is a novel, it is pretty closely based on the author's own experiences. Next we have Laura by Vera Kaspari. This is a noir set in New York City about a woman who has been murdered and a detective assigned to find the killer. It's also the basis for a very good noir film starring Gene Tierney and directed by Otto Preminger. So after you've read the book, I would certainly recommend the film. Then we have A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. You'll notice this spine is pink when the others are red, I don't know why. A Tale of Two Cities is set in London and Paris and moves between the two cities as the characters move between the two cities. It's set before the French Revolution and during the French Revolution, where the family at the centre of the novel become in great danger being in Paris during this time of terror, with the guillotine killing many people, many innocent people. Then we have the start of my Graham Greene books. You'll notice a lot of this collection is Graham Greene, as he's one of my favourite authors. First up, A Sort of Life. This is an autobiography about his early days, really, his school days, his youth spent playing Russian roulette, and his early novels when he's trying to establish himself as an author. Then we have A Burnt Out Case. This is about an architect who escapes from the modern world and goes to the Congo in the middle of nowhere, and he actually goes to a leper colony and tries to make a life there and sort of be forgotten about there, but the modern world won't let him go so easily. Then we have The End of the Affair. This is my favourite Graham Greene. It's set during the London Blitz, and it's really a love triangle about two men fighting for a woman, but the main character, he's the adulterer, and now that the affair is over, he's full of bitterness and resentment, and this is quite a serious Catholic book, and you could divide Graham Greene's books into those that are more serious and those that are more entertainments, but this is certainly the former, and it's absolutely brilliant the way he evokes the atmosphere at that particular time and place, and It's really beautiful, this book. Then we have Our Man in Havana. This is about a salesman living in Havana, Cuba, with his daughter. And it's a more humorous book. I guess you could call it a comedy, about a man who, as I say, he's a salesman and he ends up being involved in the world of espionage. And it's quite a sort of satirical take on the world of spying. Next, by Graham Greene, is The Power and the Glory. This is about a Mexican Catholic priest who is being persecuted because at this time in Mexico priests were being killed, so he's rather in hiding, trying not to be discovered. But he's a whiskey priest, he's an alcoholic, so it's a kind of personal journey for him, trying to survive and trying to reconcile his faith with his failings. Next we have The Quiet American. This is set in Vietnam before the Vietnam War, but after the French have already been there and failed. So it's really a prediction of what's going to happen to the Americans in Vietnam. It's about a British foreign correspondent who is very cynical, and he meets a young American who is very idealistic about Vietnam and is determined that it shouldn't become a communist country. But his idealism has terrible consequences for the people of Vietnam, and it's another book that's really a love triangle between this British man and the American man, vying for the affections of a Vietnamese woman. But this idealism is really an interesting prediction of the Vietnam War and the kind of danger of having a blinkered view of a country that you don't really understand. Now we have really two short stories in one: The Third Man and The Fallen Idol. Now, The Third Man was written by Greene as a screenplay for a film directed by Carol Reed and starring Orson Welles, who you can see here, and Joseph Cotten. It's set in post-war Vienna, when the city is divided into 4 areas of control by the victors. The French, the British, the Americans and the Russians each have their zone of the city, rather like Berlin, in fact. And this is about a man who arrives in Vienna to see his friend, but he finds out his friend has recently been killed in a car accident. But as the novel goes on, things aren't as they seem, and well, without giving too much away, you find out a lot about deception and the trafficking operation that was going on in Vienna at this time. Next we have Travels with My Aunt. This is a fun book about a boring retired bank manager who has nothing really going on in life except an interest in gardening, and he comes into contact after a long period of not seeing her with his aunt. And his aunt is an eccentric, mysterious woman who basically convinces him to begin travelling with with her. So they go off on these adventures to far-flung places, and in doing so, the retired bank manager, Henry, rather changes his perspective on the world and becomes a more adventurous person. This is a fun read. Next we have The Lonely Skier by Hammond Innes. Now this is an adventure story set in the Italian Dolomites about a few different people who have come to a ski lodge to stay, but really they're not there for the skiing. They know that Nazi gold has been buried somewhere nearby and they're looking for it. So it's really about these different characters fighting for this gold, and obviously their greed brings them into conflict with each other. Now we have The Castle by Franz Kafka. Now this is a story about a land surveyor who arrives in a snowy village which has a castle above it. Now he's ostensibly there to do his job as a land surveyor, but he soon finds that it's not possible for him to find work or to find somewhere to live. And this is obviously a very frustrating, confusing situation to be in. It's really a book about bureaucracy, red tape, and the struggle to find a place. I must say that it's a very boring book because it deals so heavily in this bureaucracy and a man who can't sort of progress with anything. It's just he's stuck in this never-ending situation of not being able to establish himself in the village. So it's a frustrating read, and it is a boring read. So I can't really recommend this one, even though Kafka is a well-regarded author. I mean, I think, in fairness to the author, it was his intention to create a book that was frustrating and tedious, and he does succeed in that manner. But that doesn't make it enjoyable to actually read. Now, we're on to Kurt Vonnegut, an entertaining writer. Now, Mother Night is about an American who ended up working for the Nazis during the Second World War. He was a radio broadcaster and basically spouted Nazi propaganda. So after the war, he is, of course, considered to be a traitor by the Americans, and the Israelis have him on trial for war crimes. But not everything is so black and white, because it turns out that he was actually an American agent all along. So it's a book that's really morally ambiguous, and it's his memoirs of his life, and really he doesn't make any excuses for himself, but it is interesting to consider his life and his actions from a moral point of view, and it's a thoughtful kind of book, even though in a sense the protagonist is an unlikable individual. The final book is also by Vonnegut. This is Slaughterhouse V, perhaps his most famous book. It's a strange book that jumps all over the place in terms of location and time. It's full of time travelling, essentially, and not even all of it takes place on Earth. But if there's a centre to the novel, it revolves around the bombing of Dresden during the Second World War by the Allies. The author was actually in Dresden during this time as a prisoner of war, so it's based on his own experiences, and it's an entertaining, strange book, but very readable, and I would recommend this one. So there we have all of my vintage classics. Thank you for watching.